Hi one and all, and welcome back to my channel. For those new here, my name's Nicki. I'm an author and editor, and I post videos here on YouTube about writing, editing, reading and all the other things I love. Today we're here for my reading wrap up for August. I have to say I did just try to live stream this, and I'm going to have a little rant and just say they should have kept Hangouts. Hangouts were so reliable, easy to use, no problems, and I've tried twice now to use this new webcam version, and it's just appalling. It cut 2 minutes off my live stream at the start yesterday, and today the connection just kept dropping out while I was recording. I was speaking for 2 minutes and only 8 seconds of that actually got recorded when I finally gave up and ended the stream and looked at the video. It's completely useless, so I'm having to very quickly do the filming this way, which is a bit of a pain. I've got a really incredibly busy day ahead, and I was hoping just to get the stream done, cross it off the list, and now I've got to film it, edit it, upload it, and it's going to take about 3 times as long. So that's my little rant anyway, but now I'm going to grab my book and we're going to whiz through the 20 odd books that I've been reading during August. So without any further ado, I'll kick us off, and we're beginning with The Girl the Sea Gave Back by Adrienne Young, and this is a book I received from NetGalley. Now, I haven't read any of this author's works before, although I know one of her previous ones was incredibly popular. I came to it with no expectations, but it really was only a 2.5-star read for me. There was nothing wrong with it per se. I mean, I can't put my finger on and say this was bad or that was bad. It just didn't grab me. I didn't care about the characters, I didn't care about what was happening, and I just kind of had to force myself through to the end, but I really had no enthusiasm or excitement for the story at all. Next up was Brightfall by Jaime Lee Moyer, and this is another NetGalley read, and this was a complete change from the last one because I wanted to give this book 4.5 stars. It is basically a strange fantasy retelling of Robin Hood, although it's not a straight retelling because the events of this book are set after all the famous events of the Robin Hood story. Robin Hood and Marian were married but have split up, and everyone's gone their own separate ways, but someone starts killing off all the old members of their Merry Men band, and so Marian, who is our main protagonist, has to investigate and discover what's going on, and she has certain magical abilities, and she gets help from the Fae and various other people and creatures along the way. It was a really fun, entertaining take. I absolutely loved Bert, who's one of the Fae, who obviously for Fae reasons couldn't reveal his real name, so Marian called him Bert, which is terrible really, because he's meant to be quite handsome and he's a bit of a trickster, and his name's Bert, but it's really brilliant fun. So if you like fantasy with a twist, something a little bit quirky and different, definitely check out Brightfall. Next up is a book I bought, and it is volume 1 of the Still Prince graphic novel by V.E. Schwab, and this is a prequel to her Shades of Magic trilogy, and it takes place several years before, where the king from the Shades of Magic trilogy is a young prince at the time, and he's a little bit wayward, and he's been sent off by his father to a remote outpost to lead the troops there. I thought this was fun. The artwork was okay, I wasn't absolutely in love with it, but it was interesting to see this character in his youth and in a different setting, and I'll definitely continue reading. I think volume 2 comes out at Christmas time and the final volume in March. Next up, from the library, I borrowed The Bloody Chamber by Angela Carter. Oh sorry, I forgot to say The Still Prince was 4 stars. And The Bloody Chamber is 3 stars for me. It was something of a disappointment. I've had the Bloody Chamber on my kind of radar, on my wish list for quite a while. I hadn't gotten around to it, and now I finally have. I was left to just feeling a bit lackluster. I really enjoyed the first story, the title story, but the ones after that, I mean, she was saying, oh, they're not just fantasy, or they're not just fairy tale retellings, but in some ways they are. Everyone talks about their feminist angle, but I didn't particularly see it in most of them. And none of them, apart from that first story, really grabbed me. I kind of slogged through it and was just disappointed because I'd expected to be blown away, considering how people talk about that book. Next up, I'll group these into 3. I read the first 3 of the graphic novels based on True Blood, I got these from the library. There's various authors and illustrators, so I won't list all the names, but you can look them up if you want to know them. These were a bit of a range for me. The first one I gave 2.5 stars, 3.5 to the second, and 3 to the third. The second one had the best story premise. The first one and the second one were a little bit lackluster plot-wise. And again, the artwork for me was average. Sometimes I really liked it, other times I thought it was a bit sloppy. So for me, you know, I wouldn't rush out to try and read the rest of the series of these novels. If I come across them, I might pick them up, but it was, yeah, a mixed bag and only average overall. Another graphic novel I borrowed from the library was Fevre by G.R.R. Martin. I enjoyed the book, the original novel, and I thought this was a 4-star read for me. I thought it was a pretty good adaptation. I think the story translated well into a visual medium. I thought the illustrator did a pretty decent job, and it was, yeah, as I say, a good interpretation of the source material, and it worked well in this new format. And you could read this either as a fan of the novel or someone coming to it for the first time, not knowing anything about the story. Next up was another NetGalley read, and it was Harbinger by Justus R. Stone. This was a 3-star read for me. The author is a huge fan of manga and anime, and you can definitely feel that vibe about the story, and I think it would work really well in either of those mediums. And it's possible a visual medium might actually suit the story more, because although I enjoyed the premise, I liked the idea, there's a kind of mythological basis for it, to do with Ragnarok, but it just didn't quite come together for me. It wasn't gripping, and I think if you had this visually done as a manga or anime, where you could see the characters, a bit less of the waffly prose and just get on with the action, I think it would work better. I think it's a story suited to that medium more. Next up, sticking with NetGalley, The Will and the Wilds by Charlie N. Holmberg. And this was a 3.5-star read for me. Now this is a fantasy story. A young woman is being harassed by some otherworldly creatures, and so she calls on one of their kind to make a deal for protection. Things go wrong and she ends up bound to this creature. And during the course of them trying to get rid of these other creatures and free themselves from each other, an attachment forms, and he also changes as he becomes more caught up in the human world and more caught up with her. I really enjoyed the romance element. I liked the fantasy element. The only thing that didn't quite work for me was the villain, and that's because he was really underdeveloped. We didn't really know anything about our main villain until fairly late on. We then got his name, but we never really got to know him. Who was he? Why was he doing what he was doing? And I just thought the story would have been a little bit stronger if he'd developed that aspect of it a tiny bit more. In fact, I'm saying he, she. I actually don't know if this is a Charlie female or a Charlie male, so perhaps we'll say they for a minute. If they had developed that villain a little bit more, so he wasn't just like a cardboard cutout barely mentioned, I think the story would have been stronger. So it was 3.5 stars for me, because I really liked certain aspects of it and it had great potential, but a few tweaks here and there would have made it so much stronger. Back to another library borrowing, I picked up Redemption in Indigo by Karen Lord. This is one that's been on my radar for a little while. I've wanted to read for a few years, so I was glad to finally get around to it, and it was a 5-star read for me. Now this is a fantasy or magical realism, shall we say, story based on Sinhalese folklore. I thought the use of the folklore was really great. It was a fun, quirky story. I kind of almost wanted a bit more of a romance with one of the main otherworldly figures than we got, but that's just me because I'm like that. And I would definitely recommend this if you like magical realism stories with folklore basis, and you just want a read that's really light, fun, easygoing, then Redemption in Indigo is definitely one I would suggest you pick up. Next up are a few books that I got from one of my colleagues, and first of these was Midnight Blue by Simone van der Vlugt, Vlugt even if I can say it. This was a 3.5-star read for me. It's historical fiction set against the backdrop of the rise of Delftware in Holland, the imitation of the Chinese porcelain. I found it overall very enjoyable. There's a sort of romance element, there's a bit of a murder mystery element, perhaps not mystery so much, but there's a sort of past that she has to escape from, as well as finding her way in the world and working as a potter. So on the whole, yes, if you like historical fiction, you'll find something to enjoy in this. As I said, 3.5 stars. It's not one I was absolutely madly in love with, but it was a good read, and I'm glad I borrowed it. Very different, unfortunately, was The Milkman, or Milkman, there's no the, I believe, Milkman by Anna Burns. This is a book that won the Man Booker Prize. I've heard so much ranting and raving about it, how great it is, how wonderful it is, and so I was really excited to read it, and in the end I gave it 2.5 stars. I really didn't get on with this book at all. I can appreciate what Burns was trying to do. It's very literarily clever, if I can say that. The devices she uses are interesting. However, for me, they just didn't click. I didn't like that detached style. And I found the book, on the whole, like, very little happened. There was a lot of repetition, a lot of wordy prose, and the actual action taking place was minimal. And it really failed to hold my interest, and I did have to pretty much slog through it. A better one, though, from my colleague, was Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine by Gail Honeyman. This is one a friend of mine's been wanting me to read for a while, and I'm glad I picked it up. It's 4.5 star read for me. The thing I liked about this book was the really good balance between the sort of sadness, poignancy, and then the humour and happiness. Eleanor Oliphant is a character I could relate to. She's quite quirky, she's had a difficult upbringing, difficult background, and she's adapted her life to deal with that, but it does make her a little bit socially inept. And we can sort of laugh at her mistakes and her faux pas, but at the same time we do feel for her. And I thought that where Honeyman really excelled here was getting that balance right. She wasn't preaching to us, she wasn't forcing us to feel emotions, but she was giving us a really good balance between enjoying the story, finding it humorous, but actually getting a deeper meaning beneath that. So if you like contemporary fiction with a little bit more depth and a quirky heroine, then this one's for you. And the final book that I borrowed from my colleague was Less by Andrew Sean Greer. Les is the surname of our principal character, and he's a middle-aged homosexual man who is kind of at a bit of a midlife crisis point in his life. His younger boyfriend has left him to go and marry someone else, and in order to escape going to the wedding, he decides to take up invitations that he's been offered. He's a writer, a sort of middling writer, and he's been offered all these invitations to strange literary events around the world. So to escape going to his ex-boyfriend's wedding, he accepts them all and begins this kind of worldwide trip. I gave this 5 stars. It was so funny, I was laughing aloud, it was really heartwarming too, and I really enjoyed seeing a book with a gay protagonist who wasn't typically like handsome 20-year-old. You know, he had his problems, and yet he still was able to find resolution to them and find happiness by the end, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And suddenly the sun has gone in, so I apologise if we're getting a bit dark. I might actually have a quick pause and open a couple more blinds. Bear with me 1 second. Hopefully that's a little bit better now. The next book I need to talk about is Undara by Annie Seaton. This is one I received as an ARC from the publisher, and it was a non-requested ARC. It was sent to me on spec. It's not something I probably would have requested, and in the end I gave it 3.5 stars. I did enjoy it. It was good. I liked the mystery element. I thought it was well written and nicely paced. It just wasn't something that particularly gripped me because it's not the kind of book I normally read. The premise is a woman with some personal problems has gone away to work on a project in some lava tubes in outback Australia, and along the way she gets caught up in the landowner's own personal difficulties, and so there's a bit of a sort of murder mystery again kind of thing going on in the background as well, in which she gets entangled. So there's a lot happening, and I thought there was enough action to make it engaging. It's just not a book that particularly appealed to me in terms of my personal preferences, which is the only reason it got 3.5 stars. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of readers who enjoy these kind of tales who are going to give it 4s and 5s. Going back to NetGalley, I read The Life and Death of Toyo Harada, which was a graphic novel with about 5 or 6 different authors and contributors and that, so again I'll let you look them up if you want to see who they were. This was a 3.5-star read for me. I liked the premise, which was a young boy who got caught up in the atomic detonations and acquired quite substantial supernatural powers, and others had collected powers as well from the experience, and there was a bit of a us versus them about who was in charge. He'd essentially taken charge of the planet, Toyo Harada, and there was a group that were trying to bring him down. It was a really fun idea, however I found the ending a little bit weak and it didn't completely captivate me in the way I'd hoped it would, since I love superhero tales so much. So yeah, 3.5 stars. If you're into that kind of story, then it's worth checking out, but it's not one that I'd absolutely rush out and buy. Sticking with NetGalley and sticking with graphic novels, I read Kriss, The Gift of Roth by Naifeh and Wucinich, and this was a 4-star read for me. This is a YA graphic novel, and there's a young boy who has grown up in a foster family but actually believes he comes from an ancient northern kingdom, and there are various supernatural elements involved. I kind of don't want to say too much on this one because it would spoil the story, but I really loved the premise and I definitely would read on to a second volume if one comes out and if I have the opportunity to do so. Next up was another book I received as an ARC from the publisher, another unsolicited one. This one just rocked up on my doorstep, I hadn't asked for it, and it's called The Girls by Chloe Higgins. And it's non-fiction, it's kind of a memoir about Higgins' experience with the loss of her sisters in a terrible car accident, and how that affected the family and her life in the years in between the incident and the current time. This was 3 stars for me. It was okay. I really sort of hesitate to comment on this work in a way because it's such a personal piece for the author, and I in no way want to belittle the experience she had. However, it's not the sort of thing I normally read, and it's not something I would have requested. So it was okay, it just wasn't for me. So 3 stars because I appreciated what she went through and what she was trying to do with the book, but it's just not something that appealed to me personally. Next up, another NetGalley read was Isolde by Irena Odoevtseva. This was a 4-star read for me. This is a book about a young woman who, in a way she's a little bit of a Lolita character. She's marginally older than Lolita, but she's a young woman who gets what she wants by winding men around her finger, essentially. She knows that she captivates men and she knows how to go about getting what she wants. I liked the story. I thought it was a really interesting character study in particular, because to be honest there wasn't really a clear beginning, middle and end. Events happened during the book, but it didn't really end on an obvious completed note. We're just left to wonder what she goes off and does next. So it really was more about a character study of her and the people around her. So 4 stars. It's not going to appeal to everyone, because if you're looking for that real obvious conclusion in a book, you're not going to get it. But if you're interested just in seeing character building and taking a snapshot of someone's life, then this is worth taking a look at. Excuse me, I've got a terrible itch on my nose today. Next up was another ARC from the publisher, and this one I did request, and it is The Harp of Kings by Juliet Marilia. This was a 4-star read for me. It's a fantasy novel based on Celtic folklore and myth, and we've got several main characters. All of them are training to be kind of elite warriors, if you like, and several of them are also musicians, and they have to go off, even though they haven't finished their training, they're sent off into the field because a magical mystical harp has gone missing and it's needed for a very important coronation ceremony, and they've been tasked with finding it. There's involvement along the way from the Fae and some otherworldly creatures as well. It was good, I enjoyed it, but it never completely gripped me. I didn't fall in love with any of the characters or the setting or anything. I think it's a very solid piece of fantasy writing, and if you're a fan of the genre or a fan of this author, you definitely will enjoy it. You'll definitely find something to like in it. But yeah, for me, 4 stars. It was good, but I didn't absolutely adore it. Next up was Easy Japanese Step by Step by Jean Nishi, and this is a book I borrowed from the library. I started learning Japanese 3 weeks ago, just very randomly, because I've suddenly started watching a lot of anime and manga and just decided to learn Japanese because that's what I'm like. I've done a little bit on Duolingo, but I don't really like learning that way. I'm much more of a book grammar person when it comes to learning foreign languages, which is why I borrowed this one. For me, it was a 3.5-star read. It was informative. There were some really good tables, particularly showing you how to conjugate the verbs, what you have to do to get the new endings and things like that. However, there were so many missing bits of vital information. As someone who'd not studied the language at all, and this book was meant to be aimed at beginners to intermediate, so I did expect that it would tell me important things like what the pronouns are, the fact that verbs don't conjugate by subject, the fact there's no real plural in Japanese. All these basic and quite vital bits of information are all things that I inferred as I read the book, but it was a bit of a slog, and I was thinking, well, but what about this and what about that? And I guessed what was probably true from what I was seeing in the example sentences, but it never actually laid it out and told me. I had to go online and double check that what I was thinking was correct. And I just think if the book had just given over a couple of pages, it didn't need much, just some of these really important basic bits of information, then the rest of it would have made far more sense. I think, to be fair, it's aimed at business people, so there was a lot of focus on the honorifics and on the really polite, overly respectful forms, which is fair enough, and you want to know them, but you do also want to know the basics and the plain language as well. So I definitely learnt stuff from it, but it's not one I'll be buying for my shelf. I'll be seeking out a sort of more general all-round book for that. Next up, also from the library, I got Drawing Manga by Kwonbi Ho, Tura and Engelholt. I can't even read my writing. Engelholt, I think it was. 1 star, I'm afraid, for me on this one, because it was utterly useless. It's supposed to be about drawing manga, but really there were 3 or 4 pages at the start that gave you a vague overview of eyes and face shapes, but it wasn't very comprehensive. It was really based very much on shonen and a fairly westernized view of shonen as well. And after that, it was just a series of images they'd drawn showing him 4 stages of development. It's not what I was expecting, it's not what I wanted. I really was hoping for something that went into the details about the different face shapes, eye shapes and things between shoujo, shonen. And honestly, I've been learning more from YouTube videos than I got from this book. So I don't think it's worthwhile at all, and I'm really glad I borrowed it from the library rather than buying it. And finally, to end today, I'm in the middle of reading some manga, and so I'm not going to go through what I've read so far, because it seems to me it'll make more sense to wait till I've got to the end of the series and then review them as a whole rather than keep reviewing individual volumes. So just to tell you where I'm up to, I'm reading Tokyo Ghoul, and I'm up to volume 9 out of 14, and I've got the remaining 5 on request at the library, so I should be able to talk about that series at the end of next month's vlog. And secondly is Black Butler, and this one's interesting because this is the first time I've read a manga where I haven't watched the anime first, but it's one that I've heard about and sounded intriguing, so I've decided to read it. I've read the first 3 volumes so far, and I am enjoying it. I've still got 25 to go, so it may be October by the time I get them all from the library and read those before I can review it in full for you, but I am certainly enjoying it so far. So that is my August reading wrap-up. I hope you enjoyed it and perhaps found a few possible reads for yourself amongst the ones I've reviewed. I'll be back again very soon with another vlog, and of course I'll be back with another one of these particular vlogs at the end of September. Bye for now, everyone.